Great day, class. How are you? So today, we will study the allowable deductions in your income taxation. So for now, let me share my screen to you. Right. So again, our subject is income taxation. And today, we will discuss the allowable deductions from your gross income. Okay? So at the end of this lesson, you must be able to identify allowable deductions for both the individual and corporate taxpayers. You also must identify the differences between the itemized and optional standard deductions. And you must be able to identify deductible expenses and identify expenses that are fully and partly deductible. Okay, so what is the definition of deductions? So deductions refer to items or amounts which the law allows to be deducted from gross income in order to arrive at the taxable income. Okay, so ito yung mga items or bagay na dinadeduct dun sa gross income ninyo in order for you to derive the taxable income. Kung magkano ba dapat yung itatax sa inyo. Okay, so in our previous lessons, we have discussed the definition of gross income and taxable income. Okay, so here's some of the rules, okay, in for you to consider. Number one, the taxpayer seeking deduction must point to specific provision of the statute authorizing the deduction because deductions are in the nature of exemptions for your taxation. It must be strictly construed against the taxpayer. So the taxpayer, for them to be able to claim that as a deduction from their gross income, you must be able to point out and prove to the BIR that this item is deductible. So meaning, even if you claim it in your tax return, diba, mapapile ka ng tax return, i-declare mo siya as deduction, then the BIR may assess that tax return whether it is really deductible or not. Because if not, then they will uh, have to deny your request for tax deduction. So that's it. The taxpayer, second, must be able to prove that he is entitled to the deduction. Okay? So in the assignment I have given to you, there are different kinds of taxpayers, the resident foreign corporation, the non-resident foreign corporation, and domestic corporations. That is for the corporate taxpayer. For individual taxpayers, we have we have resident citizen, non-resident citizen, resident alien, non-resident alien engaged in trade or business, and the non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business. So you must be able to identify. Later on, we will study that. And if a taxpayer fails to deduct certain expenses for a taxable year, he cannot deduct them from the income of the next or any succeeding year. So for example, your deduction or your expenses to be is deductible in the year 2019. You cannot use that as a deduction for 2020. You must be able to maximize that and use that in the taxable year 2019. Gets? Okay. So here's an overview of the computation. But basically, we will not uh, technical computations here. But here's the computation for you to be able to see. Okay, so here we have to gather. So for example, this is your return. We will have to gather all your income from all sources. So may it be legal or illegal activity or any sources, any income that you have received within a taxable year. Okay, and less exclusions. So, ililess natin yung exclusion for us to arrive at the gross income. So, yun muna yon. So, di ba, by definition of gross income, all income from whatever sources. But we have to exclude yung mga items ng income na excluded by law or by treaty or special rules, di ba? Do you remember yung definition or yung discussion natin in chapter 2 about exclusion, mga income excluded from being part of the gross income. Okay? Na-remember niyo yan? Balikan niyo na lang yung lessons natin sa mga links below. Okay? Or sa other YouTube or yung other videos. So, now, after deducting the exclusions, so we arrive at the gross income. Now, from gross income, per our deduction, for our definition, earlier mentioned, i-less natin yung mga deduction, allowable deductions from our gross income. And also, we will also deduct some of the exemptions given by law. Exemptions and deductions and exclusions, we will distinguish the differences later on. Okay? So after deducting the deductions and exemptions from the gross income, we will be able to arrive at the taxable net income. So this is ito na. So taxable net income na. Pero kung magkano na yung taxable net income mo, i-multiply mo na yun sa tax rate na ibinigay ng batas. Okay? So after multiplying that from the tax rate, we will be able to arrive at your tax due. Okay? So, however, in some instances, taxpayer has a claim for tax credit. Okay? So from your tax due, you can deduct your tax credit. Then you will be able to arrive in your tax due and payable. Payable tax. Okay? So ito na talaga yung babayaran mong liability or tax, amount ng tax. Okay? So next slide. So here's the distinguish. You have to distinguish deductions from the exclusion. Okay? So remember exclusions, then deductions. Yung dun sa earlier formula natin. Yan, di ba? So yung deductions daw refer to the amounts which the law allows to be deducted from gross income in order to arrive at the net income. So here, ang computation is ang deduction is determined para makompute mo yung net income. Whereas yung exclusions, it refer to flow of wealth to the taxpayer which are not treated as part of gross income. So ito yung income siya per se, na-receive mo siya, gain, profit, diba, within a taxable year, but it is not the income as defined by the law, by the tax law. Okay? So that is why it is excluded because it is exempted by fundamental law, by the statute, or it's not within the definition of income. Okay? So on the other, if the deductions refer or pertain to the computation of net income, ito naman, yung exclusion pertain to the computation of your gross income. Magkano ba talaga ang gross income mo? Kasi in determining yung gross income mo, siyempre pagsasama-samahin mo yung mga income, di ba? Tapos titingnan mo doon, saan ba dito yung mga excluded from gross income? Andun yun sa previous lesson natin, di ba? Yung mga items excluded. So, third, deductions refer to something spent or paid in earning gross income. Okay? Whereas exclusion, something received or earned by the taxpayer which do not form part of the gross income. And for example, sa deductions, diba? We have business expense, in the ordinary unnecessary expense, interest income, charitable, and other contributions. Whereas exclusions, diba? Andyan yung mga proceeds of life insurance received by the beneficiary upon the death of the insured, which is not an income. Okay, so nagets nyo yung difference ng deductions sa exclusions. So yung deductions, dinededuct siya sa gross income para makuha mo yung taxable net income, taxable income. Whereas yung exclusions, dinededuct mo siya from the income from all sources na nakuha mo within the taxable years para makuha mo yung gross income, kung magkano talaga. Okay? So, now, how about allowable deductions versus personal exemptions. So, so nakita niyo dito sa formula natin, we have yung mga dinededuct sa gross income are the deductions allowed by law and exemptions. So, ano bang differences nun? Parehas lang sila dinededuct sa gross income. Well, as to amount, yung deductions generally refer to actual expenses incurred in the pursuit of trade or business or practice of profession, while personal exemptions refer to arbitrary amounts allowed by law. So, ito yun yung mga um, binigay ng law, ng batas. Dahil sa sobrang laki ng tax na minsan pinapataw sa mga taxpayer, binibigyan nila ang taxpayer ng amount, certain amount, para ma-deduct agad, ma-exempt agad, okay, from gross income. Okay? For example, 'di ba ang employees purely earning compensation income from working, 'di ba? They are working from employer-employee relationships. If your salary is like 10,000 a month, then walang mga masyadong bonus, then you are already exempt from tax. Okay? As to nature, it constitute business expense ang personal, kaya siya ina-allow as allowable deductions, mga business expense to. Well, whereas personal exemptions, ito yung mga personal expenses, di ba? As to purpose, to enable the taxpayer to recoup his cost of doing business. So binibigyan ng batas ang mga nagbi-business, mga nagpa-practice ng profession nila na i-deduct yung mga cost of business nila. And it can be claimed by all taxpayers, maybe corporate or individual. Okay? Ang allowable deductions na hindi purely compensation income earner. Okay? So may exception yon, corporate and individual. Later on, we will discuss that. Whereas a personal exemptions, it covers personal, family, and living expenses and can be claimed only by individual taxpayer. So ang corporation, hindi siya pwede mag-claim ng personal exemption. Okay? Para lang sa individual taxpayers yan. No, as defined by law, allowable deductions are referred to items of deduction enumerated under Section 34A to J of the Tax Code of 1997 as amended, including the special deductions allowed to insurance companies under Section 37 of the same code, but excluding the net of carryover loss, net operating loss carryover, sorry, and any item of incentive deduction allowable under any special law that does not actually involve cash outlay. So, pina-assignment ko sa yung null ko, di ba? So, later on, we will discuss that. So, we have at least 2 or 3. Let's say 3 na lang. Pero ang pinaka-common dyan are the Optional Standard Deduction or the OSD and the Itemized Deduction. So, itong BIT LOD Corp, LOD 3 Corp, mnemonics ko lang yan para mas mabilis matandaan, ma-memorize. Okay, so what are these itemized deductions that are allowed to be deducted from your gross income? So we have BITLOD3, ibig sabihin DDD, then Corp, CORP. So we have business expenses, interest expense, taxes, losses, bad debts, depreciation, depletion, charitable and other contributions, research and development expenditures, pension trust contributions. Sorry for the typo, graphical error in interest expense. Okay. So before we proceed to that discussion, we have to identify sino ba yung mga hindi pwede mag-avail ng deductions. Okay? Whether is it an optional standard deduction or OSD or itemized deduction. So we have number 1, resident citizen, non-resident citizen, and resident alien whose income is purely compensation income. So ito yung sinasabi ko sa inyo kanina. Kapag ikaw ay ang income mo is purely dahil lang sa trabaho mo, diba? You cannot avail of these deductions. Next, non-resident alien engaged in trade or business cannot avail of optional standard deduction. So we'll study ano ba yung optional standard deductions. Pero standard deduction, pero they may claim itemized deductions. How about non-resident alien not engaged in trader business? So may kaibahan yan, di ba? Sa assignment ko, different between non-resident alien engaged in trader business at not engaged in trader business. Since their gross income from sources within is subject to final tax of 25%. So tandaan, NRA and ETB, in number 3, they cannot claim OSD or itemized deduction. The number 4, non-resident foreign corporation cannot claim either itemized or OSD since their gross income from sources within is subject to a final tax of 25%. So to summarize, later I have a rate here. But okay, so we can proceed now to the discussion on optional standard deduction. Okay, optional standard deduction is found in Section 34L of the National Internal Revenue Code or the NIRC. It refers to a fixed percentage deduction without regard to any actual expenditures in lieu of the itemized deduction. It is merely a privilege that may be enjoyed by certain taxpayers. So, assuming, di ba, usually nire-refer to ng mga taxpayers kapag wala na silang mga resibo. I mean, tinatamad na sila magkolekta ng mga resibo nila. They have an option to file an optional standard deduction. Okay? So, magkano ba yung rate? Sabi rito, rule number one, rate does not exceed 40% of your taxable income. Net of your gross income, sorry. So, for you to be able to deduct your expenses, it must not exceed 40%. So, an individual subject to tax under Section 24 other than a non-resident alien, NRA, non-resident alien, may elect a standard deduction in an amount not exceeding 40% of his gross sales or gross receipts sa pag-individual taxpayer ka. Whereas in case of a corporation subject to tax, it may elect a standard deduction in an amount not exceeding 40% of its gross income. So we have an example here. Example, a retailer of goods who signified his intention to avail of the optional standard deduction has a gross income of 1 million and cost of sales amounting to 800,000 pesos. So meron daw retailer ng goods na sabi niya, sige, mag-a-avail ako ng optional standard deduction. So ito yung income ko, gross income ko, 1 million pesos. Pero ang cost of sales ko, yung mga gastos ko, 800,000 pesos. So if that retailer is an individual taxpayer, let's have a computation. So dito sa left, we have a gross income of 1 million and ang OSD rate, let's say 40%, maximum na yan 40%. Now, kapag minultiply mo yan sa 1 million, ang deductible optional standard deduction mo is 400,000 pesos. So ganito yan, nasa right. Hence, your taxable income would be, okay, yung gross income mo is 1 million pesos and ang allowable deduction mo allowable deduction, optional standard deduction mo is 400,000 pesos. So pag may nakita kayong close and open parenthesis, guys, ibig sabihin yan, i-deduct mo. Okay? So you will be able to arrive at a taxable income of 600,000 pesos. So, paano pag corporation naman yung retailer? So here's the computation. So 1 million yung kanyang gross sales, then dineduct niya muna yung cost of sales niya, yung mga expenses niya sa pagbebenta niya na 800,000 pesos. So ang kanyang gross income will be 200,000 pesos. Then tsaka niya inimultiply ang rate ng optional standard deduction na 40% maximum. Okay? Then the corporation will be able to arrive at 80,000 pesos na deductible OSD. Okay? So the computation will be as follows. Nasa right. Tingin ka sa dito. Okay? So yung gross income mo ng corporation is 1 million, i-deduct mo muna yung cost of sales na 800,000 pesos and also you have to deduct the allowable OSD. optional standard deduction, 80,000 pesos na based dito sa computation natin. Then you will be able to arrive at a taxable income of 120,000 pesos. Okay? So question, bakit po hindi dineduct ng 800,000 sa individual? Bakit? Kasi kapag nag-avail na, okay. So, di-discuss natin yan later. So, rule number 2, optional standard deduction is available only to resident citizen, non-resident citizen, resident alien, domestic corporation, and resident foreign corporation. Hindi ito available sa mga non-resident alien, whether engaged in trade or business or not engaged in trade or business, and non-resident foreign corporation. Okay? So number 3 rule, unless the taxpayer signifies in his return his intention to elect the optional standard deduction, he is considered as having availed of after itemized deduction. So you have to let the BIR know that you are availing the optional standard deduction, because otherwise, kapag hindi mo sinulat, then you are considered to have availed of the itemized deduction. Okay? So there's a difference between the two. Kahabulin ka ng BIR sa mga resibo mo. Okay? Bakit ka nag-deduct ng OSD if hindi mo nilagay sa return mo na you are going to avail of the OSD. Okay? So rule number 4, such election when made by the qualified taxpayer is irrevocable for the year in which made. However, he can change to itemized deduction in the succeeding year. So 2019, sabi mo, BIR, mag-a-avail ako ng OSD. Okay? Hindi mo na pwedeng baguhin yon kapag magpa-file ka na ng consolidated return mo in the taxable year. Okay? For 2019. Okay? However, pag comes 2020, pwede ka na mag-avail ng itemized deduction. Pwede mo na siyang palitan. Pero within the same year, hindi na pwedeng pabago-bago. Okay? So I have an example here, I think. Ernesto, he's a Filipino citizen and a practicing lawyer. So he filed his income tax for 2007 and claiming optional standard deductions. So 2007, nag-avail si Attorney Ernesto ng OSD. And now, realizing that he has enough documents to substantiate his profession, connected expenses, he now plans to file an amended income tax return for 2007 in order to claim itemized deduction. So, na-realize ni Attorney Ernesto, meron naman pala akong sapat na mga proof, mga resibo, diba? To prove yung mga itemized deductions ko, yung mga expenses ko para ma-deduct. Diba? And probably mas makakababa siya or mas makakatipid siya, diba? Ng babayaran niyang total taxable income or yung tax due and payable income niya, tax. Now, so sabi niya, pwede pa ba? Will Ernesto be allowed to amend his return? Why or why not? What do you think? So the suggested answer here is no. Since Attorney Ernesto has elected to claim the optional standard deductions, said the election is irrevocable for the taxable year for which the return is made. So once na nagsabi ka na kay BIR, OSD muna ako ng 2007, mag-OSD ka. Okay? Hindi ka pwedeng pabago-bago ng isip. Okay? But comes 2008, magpa-file ka na naman ng return mo, pwede na ang itemized deduction doon. Okay, so next is rule number 5, OSD is not available against compensation income arising out of an employer-employee relationship. So hindi rin to pwede sa mga purely compensation income earner. Okay, yung mga nagtatrabaho lang. So sa mga isang kumpanya na as employee. Okay, so rule number 6, proof of actual expenses is not required but the taxpayer should keep records pertaining to his gross income. So here, ito yung sinasabi ko sa iyo, diba? Hindi mo naman na kailangan ipakita yung mga resibo mo, yung books ng company mo kapag mag-avail ka ng OSD. However, you should still keep it on your for your records, di ba? And number 7, corporations who avail of the OSD should still submit financial statements when it files its annual ITR or the income tax returns and to keep such record pertaining to its gross income. So, iba naman pag corporation. So, even if hindi na siya kailangan as proof, di ba? Kailangan mo pa rin mag-submit ng financial statement kapag corporation ka. Okay? Pertaining to your gross income. So, ito yung summary, okay? For your reference. So, ito yung mga types of taxpayers. We have resident citizen, non-resident citizen, resident alien, non-resident alien engaged in trade or business, non-resident alien not engaged in trade or business, domestic corporation, resident foreign corporation, and non-resident foreign corporation. So mapapansin nyo, ang allowed lang dito ay yung mga resident citizen, non-resident citizen, and resident alien, domestic corporation, and resident foreign corporation. They are the ones who are allowed to claim optional standard deduction. The rest, they're not allowed to claim it. Wait, what's this? Okay, so I think that's all for optional standard deduction. So for the rest of the discussion, I will post it in a separate video. Okay, so if you have any questions, just comment it here in uh, our Google Classroom or here on this YouTube video. Okay, so have a nice day.